This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, brought to you by the Israel Democracy Institute, an independent center of research and action dedicated to strengthening the foundations of Israeli democracy. I'm your host, Gilad Halpern.
And I'm Yael Berda.
If you like us, please show it. We need your support. Please give to our show by going to our homepage. That's tlv1.fm/podcast/Tel Aviv Review. Scroll down to the bottom and click the big red button that says Patreon. Click and support us because we're counting on you. In return, every week we'll be bringing you episodes talking about books and research and other things that caught our attention.
Our guest today is the head of the program on religion, nation, and state at the Israel Democracy Institute, and the director of the Joan and Irwin Center for Shared Society. She led a team of researchers that drafted the first biannual statistical report on religion and state that will be launched later this month. Shlomit Ravitsky-Tur Paz, hello and welcome. You co-authored the biannual report with Ariel Finkelstein and Ayala Goldberg.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us, what is the significance of a report focused on religion and the state at this moment in time?
So our Center for Shared Society, we have an interesting, very successful program on ultra-Orthodox community in Israel. And we have a statistical report on this issue every year for 7 years now. And we decided it's time to have a statistical report on religion and state as well. This discussion, as we see it, is led with a lot of conflicts, a lot of negotiations, a lot of ideology and interests, and with very little evidence-informed policy making. Everyone has an idea, everyone knows what they think, but they hardly use the actual data from the ground. We did some kind of pilot last year while the Knesset Committee on Religion and State had their negotiations on the reform, the kashrut reform. So there was a lot of talk and a lot of ideas and a lot of ways to try and change the field of kashrut. And then we came, our program, Ariel Finkelstein, the researcher, came with a paper on the data of kashrut. How much does it cost to Israel to have the nowadays kashrut platform? What are the options to change how much that will cost? How many products have a double or three times a kashrut certification? So all this data was given to the Knesset Committee, and we saw how this changed the environment. We decided this is something we have to do in all the issues of religion and state.
And the purpose of having a biannual report is to be able to track trends over time and see where it's going?
This would be the first time. Some of the things the IDI did in different issues, for example, the democracy index, checked some things in surveys, but now we decided to do a combination of a survey but survey that doesn't check what people think, but what people actually do, and the data taken from many different statistics, some of them from the Central Bureau of Statistics, and some of it taken just from the ground. We went and checked some of the data, what is open on Shabbat, what is closed, how many buses are actually working on Shabbat, and so on and so on. And we're going to launch this statistical report, a very large one with a lot of data, and this would be the first time. And of course, after a few years, we'll be able to follow up on what the differences and what's actually happening between the years.
So can you talk about trends already? Where is this going? Is Israel secularizing?
It's interesting, I think. It goes both ways. I mean, when President Reuven Rivlin had his four tribes speech. So the good thing about this idea of how
Just to say that then President Rivlin gave this momentous speech in which he talked about the four tribes of Israel.
four tribes of
The
Israel.
secular tribe, the ultra-Orthodox tribe, the Arab tribe, and
Yes, and the religious, the Orthodox religious tribe. Yes, the secular, the Arab, the ultra-Orthodox, and the religious. And this was 2015. In 2018, while in the United States, he said there is a fifth tribe of the Jews in the diaspora. We can say, of course, there's a tribe of traditional Jews, there's a tribe of Reform Conservative Jews, liberal Jews. We have other tribes as well. But his idea, when he had this speech of the tribes, he said there is no more concept of majority and minorities in Israel, but we should be talking about partnership. So on one hand, I think this is something with a lot of inspiration and very interesting to say there is no majority, we're talking minorities, we're talking about a partnership. But on the other hand, while doing this, we're saying every tribe is for their own, and as if there are very strict fences between them. So when you're asking me if the community in Israel, the Jewish community, is secularizing, so I would have to say that I don't see those fences in between. There is a lot of gray areas. A lot of people can be identified in a few places, in different tribes. Sometimes here, sometimes there. In this issue, I'm here. In this issue, I'm differently. You know, Bambi Sheleg was talking about the pizza concept, that as if the community in Israel is a pizza. And then you can see the different slices of each tribe. And when you're looking on the pizza, you can see that the inner part, the people in most of the space of the pizza are closer to one another in the middle of the pizza than they are to their own tribes. Other
extreme.
The extreme people.
I'm sorry to be taking over here, but this is what you're saying is, as I understand it, is about identity, about religious identity, or where do they see themselves on the spectrum? And I think that the power of your report is that it gives us evidence, right? You know,
it gives us evidence,
but like empirical data.
Says that the same people may be very secular on one aspect of their life. So the same people can be very secular in one part of their lives, but much more traditional on a different one. For example, one of the very interesting statistical data we found out from the survey, we have in this report also a survey, is about who's recognized as a Jew by the people of Israel. In this issue, it's about the Jewish people of Israel. So we can see that 70% of the Jewish Israelis do not recognize someone that his father is a Jew and his mother isn't a Jew as a Jew. 70%. More than 50% of the secular people in Israel would not recognize this person as a Jew. I think this is, I was shocked by those numbers. Mm-hmm. We can see
because what you would say is it's actually they're looking at the religion at the religious law, which says if you have a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother.
Even though the secular, what they opt for is the halachic conception of
yes, the halachic concept has a lot of merit here. But on the other side, when we check, for example, we would have thought that many of the places of the institutions of culture and commerce would be closed on Shabbat. And we see in our numbers that a lot is open. If you want to get into the numbers, we can do that. And also, how many people are working on Shabbat? Would you have a thought? You want to give me a number? What percentage of the Israelis, either Jews or all of them, are working on Shabbat? 5%.
Yes.
So we find out 18.8 of the Jews in Israel are working on Shabbat. I can give you the actual number. It's more than 1,640 people, Jews, are working on Shabbat. Of course, we have also Arabs, almost 130,000 people.
So about
Now,
25%.
It's 18.8, 25 of the Arabs, 18.8 of the Jews, it's 20%.
But what does
One
it mean
of every
to
five.
work on Shabbat? To actually go to work or check your emails
Okay,
on
so
Shabbat?
this is very interesting, your question, because a few years ago, a survey of IDI found out that 400,000 people are working on Shabbat, and now more than 600,000. We asked them, do they work at home or inside the field or the office? And we found out that almost 350,000 work in the offices, and 270,000, 275, and 500 say they work from home. But not every Shabbat, but they do work sometimes on Shabbat. So this is interesting. Does COVID-19, that changed all our working ways, we work more from home, did this change something about the preservance of Shabbat as well? But also we have many people who are out, and this is also interesting because this is not what the law is saying. Of course, when we look on Shabbat, on work on Shabbat, we have two different concepts we want to check. One of them would be how religious and traditional people are. What are they doing on Shabbat? Do they go to bathe in the sea, to the shore? Or do they do kiddush and have a Shabbat meal and go to shul and so on? But the other concept is, are we sensitive to people having a free day?
So it's a social aspect of it.
It's a social aspects.
So what you're saying is, let's just we'll do like a
recap.
A summary for a second. So what you're saying is, so when we're looking like on the economic axis, we have a lot more people that we would expect working on Shabbat, and we can say that's an economic issue. And then on the other hand, what you mentioned was that even secular Jewish Israelis actually are looking at the halachic law when it comes to the identity of, so that we could call that the national axis. So what you're finding here, and this is what's so interesting about looking at practices, I think, is that different concepts of religion and their location in people's lives are having a different kind of effect in their practices.
I think one of the interesting questions that is a very, people are trying to give an answer. Does the laws and the way we're supposed to act, should this be decided by the state or by local authorities, local governments? Are we supposed to look at the people living in a specific place and say, okay, we have mostly traditional people, so we'll have the Shabbat, the public sphere of the Shabbat would have to be adapted to them. And we have more secular or ultra-Orthodox and so on, or mixed community, we will have to give options that are right for their lives. Or, the way most things are now, we should say, the Shabbat is a concept of whole Israel. In the conference, we're going to have a big conference for religious and state next week, 21st of September, which is Kafhei Elul, which is the day the world was created.
Perfect choice.
Yeah.
The world was created by, and statistics create the world.
So, we're going to be mentioning 20 years for the Gavizon Medan pact, or so, and their ideas, what they suggestions for the Israeli community, the Jewish community, it was on Shabbat, for example, to have commerce closed, and on the other hand, on the other hand, transportation and culture and fun activities open. And we can see, even though the Gavizon and Medan suggestions are not in the law, we can see in most cities that we have some kind of a mixed. When you look on actual commerce, we have a few things open, but much more than what we had a few years ago. When we look on culture, almost everything is open. 98% of the cinemas are open. 82% of the museums are open. 52% of the big theaters are open on Shabbat. We're talking Israel-wide. Mm-hmm. And the big malls, the big ones, where you can have tens or hundreds of open places, like the Bilu Center and so on, you have 26% of them open on Shabbatot. So a lot is open, but...
And also much more than before.
Much more than before. You can see the way this is changing. But most of the big commerce would be outside the cities, not inside. When you look even on Tel Aviv, you will see that very few things which are not food. Food is open everywhere, not in Jerusalem, but you can see in Tel Aviv, for example, almost everything is open when talking food-wise, but other commerce almost only outside.
But then going back to what Yael just said about the different axes meeting, is it really a question of religion, or is it just the way society is going with neoliberalism? Right, many people are working a lot more. Work and profit are consecrated now a lot more than they were before. Is it really? Are we?
And shopping and commerce.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
is it about money or
about
religion?
Is religion even a factor here in the first place?
Yes, I think maybe religion isn't the right word, but tradition. Mm-hmm. I think tradition is a big factor in the Jewish life, of course, in the Muslim life and the Arab Christians.
But this survey is really interested in kind of the Jewish community.
Not exactly. We have a lot of the data is also about the Arab community, Muslim and Christian. There are, of course, a few issues of mikveh and that are specific, or what you're not supposed to do on Shabbat. We do check the Arabs about working on Shabbat or having a free day during the week. If it's not Saturday, may it be Friday or Sunday. Do they have it? Do they get the money they're supposed to have? Does the State of Israel check this and try to make sure to enforce it?
I'm going to guess here that the answer is there's no enforcement. Am I right?
Very little. We can see maybe 32 cases were opened on a few years ago, and now 2 cases in the last year. It's also COVID and so on, but you can see it going down, and this is only administrative enforcement. You hardly have any enforcement of other kinds. So very little.
And what are the main insights that you think?
Just a minute. Excuse me, one more sentence about when we're checking marriage and divorce. We will check the Arabs as well. Mm-hmm. So we are now writing. This is something that our center is working on. We have a research going on about religion and state for the Arab people in Israel, and what's happening and where the money goes and so on. So this is something that we care about. But you're right that there are a few issues that are only checked.
But what does it tell you? What insights do you have looking at non-Jews in the Jewish state? I mean, when religion plays such a big role in public life in Israel, by looking at non-Jews, what insights do you have?
In a way, the more the society here is religious, it's easier with the Arab population, because the Arab population is very traditional. So sometimes you can see that the respect for religious laws, when you have the religious discussion between Jews and Arabs, and this is the issues, in a way it's easier. to have respect, and because those two religions are quite similar. They both have a lot of actual laws. They both have very similar davening. They both believe in God, the faith in God. So I think when you actually look at the religious aspects, it's not the problem. In a way, the Arabs and the ultra-Orthodox and some of the Orthodox Jews stand in one side, while the secular, most of the people in Israel, which are secular or very low traditional, we check secular, traditional who are not religious, traditional religious, ultra-Orthodox, and Arabs.
So the full spectrum.
So, yes. So the secular, in a way, is on the other hand of both the Arabs and the religious. So in those issues, it's not exactly that division doesn't work as it works in other aspects when we talk on political, on security and peace and so on.
So let me ask you, one of the things that you find is a decline in public faith in state religious institutions. And that's something that we really want to get into. First of all, how do you see that?
Okay, so we asked how much faith people have in the religious institutes. This is something the Democracy Index that is done here for 20 years. This year would be the 20th time the Viterbi Center is asking about faith in the courts in Israel, in the Knesset, in the government, in the IDF, and so on.
Just to say that the loyal listeners of this podcast would know it because we've had Professor Tamar Herman who's coordinating it, I think twice already.
Okay, great. So the faith in institutions goes down before we said anything about religious institutes. We see that maybe if we saw in the beginning of the 2000s, the year of 2000 and a few years later, we saw that maybe if you look at all the institutions checked, would see 60% faith. Nowadays, we will see 40%. Okay, so this is before we said anything about the religious institutions. Now, when we look on the religious institutions, so we can see, can you give me a guess who would be the institution with the best faith for Jews in Israel?
A religious institution.
Religious institutions. We have like the Rabbanut, the local Rabbanut, the courts, the rabbinical courts, the government office, the Chevra Kadisha, burial institutions.
Chevra Kadisha.
Okay, so you're right. 45%. I was surprised.
It's actually quite hard to beat. I mean, there's so much competition. Who's the least popular among those?
But 45% is a very good mark.
Excellent, yeah.
So, and we talk so much about how bad the Chevra Kadisha is, and so many, you can hear so many people said they had a very bad experience and so on, and those tales are going around. But when you check it, you see 45%. So I think this is interesting. This is interesting data.
How do you explain it?
I think that in a way also when you check what is the most adopted ceremony secular and traditional people hold dear, so it's Kaddish and sitting Shiva. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about death and all the ceremonies that are around the death, in a way, we are more open to tradition. Maybe it's because family issues. Your parents would have liked something, or you say, in this area, I don't want to do a mistake.
And also, I think it's a very powerful social template. I mean, we know how Shiva, it really crosses barriers, even between Palestinians and Israelis in that sense. So the Shiva becomes something very, very powerful. So maybe it's that.
So in a way, I think it's connected. that when you look on the things around death, you want to be more traditional. So maybe this is also a part. Also, I think there was a big reform in the Chevra Kadisha. They're trying more competition, more. And the last one would be nowadays. It's interesting. It wasn't the same before.
Let's guess.
Guess. Okay. Give me a guess.
The rabbinate.
Not the rabbinette. The rabbinette, by the way, is 34%.
Okay.
Wow.
That's not bad either.
Not so
bad
bad
considering,
either.
no.
It was while the IDI democracy index checked, it was last year 30%, and 10 years ago, 2017, 20%. It's not exactly the same methodology, but you can see it was going down from 46 at 2003 to 20 in 2017, and then going up to 30. We found now in a slightly different methodology, we found 34%. So we see the local ones, like Chevra Kadisha, and also local rabbis, which is 38%, are more liked. Then you have more faith. Maybe this is also part of the reason. Than the ones that are farther from you, but still the rabbinate has nice numbers. The court 32.5, and the office, the government office for religion and state, is the lowest now with 24%. So this might be a specific thing because of the reforms of Matan Kahana that all the ultra-Orthodox are against, and so this is maybe a specific thing. We'll have to see
I'd like
it again.
to zoom out again and go back to my initial question about, you said that many people get things wrong about religion, state in Israel, and that you'd like to bring them evidence fresh off the oven and something that is accurate, that they can do something with, right, decision makers. So let's take, for example, this surprising data about Chevra Kadisha and the tremendous faith that Israeli Jews have in them. How do you translate it into policy? Or what would be your policy recommendations?
So we'll have to see what were the changes done in Chevra Kadisha in the last few years. And also the publicity of them. Who did they touch? How did they work? Did they give a better service? And if faith is something we wanna take care of, so we would like to try and learn for this. Sometimes it's about different ideas in the society. So if Matan Kahana, some supports his reforms and some don't, it not necessarily says that because there is no faith in the reforms, we should not do it. So we'll have to check the situation and see, and also around the time. Faith in institutions is a very important thing. You cannot work in the public sphere without the faith of the people. But it's also sometimes very popular, because people like what they know, what they're used to, what is like their families. Sometimes it's different.
So what you mean is basically sometimes there are reforms that have less support at the beginning because they're trying to transform policy, and then with time they gain support because people get used to them.
Yes, and maybe this is the right thing to do. Also, a very interesting thing we see is that the Arabs have much higher faith in their courts, the Jews' courts, the Muslim courts. So we understand that they see it as a kind of identity,
the community
reflection, yes, for their place. So maybe this is also something we can learn policy from. That when you give a specific identity, you give it a place, you give it an institution. You let it stand up stand up high and give the ideas and not try to make everyone the same.
It sounds almost Ottoman, what you're saying, right? Like the millets.
Yeah. There we are.
I think people sometimes think that in order to have a conversation while the ideas are very different, so you have to, in a way, race the differences and try to say everyone is the same and we don't think something differently. We don't have a very particular ideas. Everything is very universal and everyone are very the same. And I think in a way it's the exactly other way around. When you have the option to be yourself, to have your identity, to stand up high with your ideas, with your family, with your tradition, with your sources, you will be more able to listen to the other person and to the other person's sources and traditions and stories and narratives. And when you raise everything, so you're very afraid. You don't have a space to stand on. You're all, or you're like in every wind. So you will be afraid to listen to something that is different from your own story.
So I want to do another little summary here,
Yeah.
because this is so interesting. So you're mentioning two major changes. One is kind of looking at the difference between the local practices and the statewide practices. So local versus national and those differences there. And the second thing that you just said now was having more flexibility about how these institutions operate vis-a-vis different communities and the way these communities are connecting to them.
Yes, and of course, when we're talking about the Jewish institution, it's tougher because the differences of identities, while being a minority, a lot of the Muslims are saying, okay, we have a connection. We see, even though, of course, in every society you have different colors and different ways and ideas, but in the majority of the Jews, of course, we have different tribes and everyone stands on their own. So it's tougher, but yes, I think this is something we have to do. It's also interesting that we see, if we're looking at trends, we see that even when people are doing Jewish ceremonies, and still people are doing, we didn't check it now, but we know it from other surveys here in the IDI and different places, that people are quite traditional when we're talking about ceremonies. Of course, the Kaddish and Shiva, as we spoke, but also other ceremonies. We see sometimes they are doing the Jewish thing for example, they will do the Brit Milah. They will still do it, but will do it with the doctor in his office, and then have the friends to a party with no Jewish symbols, or have the marriage, even if they do. We also checked about marriages. If we'll have time, I'll tell you a few pointers. But they will do the Jewish marriage in the Rabbanut, and we have the friends for a big party without the Jewish. So it's not the same question. Do they do in the environment of Israel, which is quite traditional, with their parents that sometimes, are on their shoulders to do things in a specific way, or their concern for the kids and so on. But not necessarily they will celebrate their Jewish identity in the same way that I would like to see everyone chooses the way they have a connection to their narratives and tradition and sources and celebrate it.
But again, going back, the question of marriage, maybe you can say what you wanted to say about the findings of the marriage before I get to my more general question about it.
Okay, so we see in numbers that, of course, we know that in everywhere people are less getting married, and sometimes
You mean across the globe, everywhere?
across the globe, the numbers of how many people for 1,000 people, how many are married. So we can see the OECD number is 4.6.
Of couples that are married?
In a year, for 1,000 people.
I see. So 4.6 marriages
Yes.
for 1,000 couples.
And in Israel, we can see it dropping down from 9.6 in the 70s to 6 in the 80s and 5 in 2019. But still, the Muslims in Israel are 8. This is the extremist in the OECD in Israel. The number here is 5.3 now. So less people are getting married. But still, we do have, in 2019, we had 33,300 and something marriages, religious marriages here in Israel. 2020, because of the COVID-19, it was a little less, 7,000 something, and we guess it's going to go up back to the 33,000. We see people who are getting married outside of Israel and then coming and being seen as recognized as married here. So we can see about during the last 20 years, almost 150,000 couples.
So wait a minute, these are religiously married or secularly married?
They are getting married outside of Israel. Maybe they're doing also a personal religious ceremony. We won't know about it.
But they're avoiding the religious marriage.
They're avoiding the religious, or they can't do the religious marriage. Mm-hmm. So 45 of them, both are citizens of Israel. About the others, we don't know. Maybe one of them...
45%.
45%.
Right.
In the others, maybe they chose, and maybe one of them, lives somewhere else, so they did the ceremony with their parents. Now, the interesting thing is the Statistical Bureau does not publish the numbers of one-gender marriage, how many of them, and we can see in the last few years, only around 180 people per year, couples per year, are trying to get recognized in Israel as married. This is something that's interesting, that they're not interested in getting recognized. And we see on the numbers of there is in the last 11 years, there is an option for people who cannot get married here because they have no religion. In Israel, if you're a Muslim, you go to get married in the Muslim institutions. If you are from this specific Christian church, you go, and of course, just to the Rabbanut and the rabbinical courts. So people who has no religion,
they don't have one of those religions.
No. People who says I don't have a religion.
Okay. Yes.
Unaffiliated.
Okay, unaffiliated
to any religion. So there was for 11 years there is an option to get married here and be recognized. Only 144 couples asked for this option.
That's incredible. So it actually shows again how religious trends or maybe attitudes toward religion go hand in hand with broader social patterns. Like, for example, how the decline in marriage across the board is also reflected in Israelis' attitude towards religious marriage. It's also, the fact that, the decline, as you said, the shaky trust or faith in religious institutions also reflects similar patterns of faith in state institutions in general. So basically, you can say...
People are more individual, people are more universal. And this is something we see here too, about the marriage. Less people want to get married at all. We can see what's called Yeduim Batzibur, people who are living together without marriage, and they are entitled to all the rights, benefits of the law, because they can show that they actually live also economically together. Sometimes they have kids together. We can say
cohabitation, I think it's called.
Yes, yeah. So from the Jews, we can see if in 1984 only 0.4 from the couples had this arrangement, in 2019 we're talking 6.1, which is 110,820. And from the secular Jews, we're talking about 11%. And of course, from the one-gender marriage, we can see the numbers are large. 8.6 of those couples are living in this way, while their number is very, very similar, very, very low when we check the marriage couples. So we can see different choices of people in nowadays, and we can see what's happening when you have when you're a part of a specific stream or tribe or identity. What would be your choices? Sometimes you can see the whole group chooses the same, and sometimes you have much more diverse options.
So I just want to ask you something, because this, for me, it was so fascinating. It really goes against a lot of intuition that people have. You know, a lot of people, especially secular, will tell you that the country is becoming more religious. A lot of times they're going to map it on to like right and left wing, so it's more religious and more right wing, and because they go hand in hand. And here you're showing a much more complex picture that kind of doesn't let us map on the issue of religion and secularity to the political issue, to the political.
So first of all, that's why getting the data is important, because it leads you to interesting questions that you would like to find out, and maybe you're thinking wrong, or maybe there is a difference between the feelings and what's actually happening. This is a true feeling. It's not a wrong feeling. It's not because you're wrong. It's because a lot of people here are traditional. It's because the ultra-Orthodox community gets bigger. So there are a lot of questions of how Israel will look 50 years from now. And it's also because I think sometimes there is a difference between the feeling of being a part of something. A lot of Israelis are not going by the halacha. They're not religious by the halacha, but their sentiment for Jewish tradition, which sometimes go hand in hand with the sentiment for family, for remembrance of grandparents or of parents. So this is a very strong sentiment here in Israel. My thoughts about this, that as much as the state will give options and won't enforce, the more people will be traditional. Because I think the traditional sentiment is very strong. On the other hand, as you said, we see what's happening in the world. And people like to be individuals. But when they touch the ceremonies of life, the very important, for example, I think that if we will have here a civil marriage, after a few years of, celebrating the options, a lot of people will choose to have a free religious marriage, meaning ask someone, rabbi of this kind or of another, to help them make a significant Jewish ceremony. So we see it about Brit Milah, that people are not asked to do this by the state, but they're choosing this way. Very little people in Israel are choosing when they die for their body to be cremated. Thank you. To be cremated. We see even among the seculars, only 10% are even thinking about the options. And we also see that even though there is a number of people who wants to be married not by Chevra Kadisha, but by some kind of civil.
Married or buried?
Buried.
Buried. Right.
That would be weird.
Too close.
That would be strange.
So even though I think we see that there are a lot of people who want to be buried by Chevra Kadisha in an Orthodox way, we have also we have people, a lot of people, a third about of the Jews who wants a civil burial. But even when we go to those ceremonies, we see them doing many of the traditional ceremonies. They do the Kaddish. They do, even not long ago, I went to, there was a coronation, and then they did this ceremony. So they had, they wanted the dirt They had people holding the, how do you say?
Shovel.
The shovel. And there was nobody there. There was a tree that they planted. But they did the same, with their hands. They wanted to see the dirt. They wanted to say the Kaddish. So
in other words, just like everything else in our modern times, religion in Israel is custom-made these days. Can you say that?
it's not the reality, but it's where we're going, because a lot of the Jewish life here is law-made, not custom-made.
No, but these are the printers.
We can see that when you look on the laws and you look on the reality, what's actually happening, and it's not the same thing.
And it's a big gap.
Yes, there is a gap. When you look, for example, on public transportation on Shabbat. So this is a big issue now with the Minister of Transportation, Merav Michaeli, and we're going to have her here in our conference next week, and we will talk to her about the reforms she wants to do. She did not do them in the last year when she was in office, and even the government decision from this week, it's not going to change the Shabbat, but we can see there are 19 bus lines that are working on Shabbat. We have a lot of lines working, 2,000 and something in Arab and mixed cities or places. I'm not talking about
Shabbat lines in strictly Jewish areas.
Yes, in Jewish areas. So we see 17 lines by local authorities and 2 others in a private institutions that are without free of charge, because they cannot, it's not according to the law. They have to do it like private shuttles. They can't take money. And they have a few times on Shabbat for the beach, for clubs, and so on, they take people. So how is this happening? So you see, it's the same mayor that his laws of his authority, his city, writes that things are closed on Shabbat, and this is his laws. And of course, we have the state laws about transportation, and still he's doing what he can to serve his people. So it's interesting that we see a lot of things that are happening from the ground, and we have the laws, and the truth is somewhere in between.
All right, this is a good place to end. Shlomit Ravitsky-Tur Paz, who authored this new statistical report on the nation state for the Israel Democracy Institute that will be launched very soon. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And also many thanks to the Israel Democracy Institute for the generous support, and to Itai Shalem, the manager of TLV1 Studios. And now we've got a request, because many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcasts app, and would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. You too can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive, it has almost 800 interviews. Please like us on Facebook, follow me and Yael on Twitter, and most important, join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
And Shana Tova.
And Shana Tova.